He came to the mountains because his home had learned how to whisper at night, and the whispers would not let him sleep. Snow was falling over Coldwater Ridge when a tired police officer and his old German shepherd began a hike that would change everything. The dog stopped without a sound and sat the way only life and death moments teach. No smoke, no fire, no warning. Only a quiet metallic hum in the wind and a truth someone had tried very hard to bury. That morning, the mountain was not a place of rest. It was a place of reckoning. Where are you watching from today? Tell us in the comments. And stay with us, because this story is not about a crash. It is about the moment a man chose not to walk away. Coldwater Ridge. Montana wore winter the way an old hymn wears a cracked note. Still true, still haunting, still able to make a grown man swallow hard. Snow fell in patient sheets across the main street, softening the edges of storefront signs and burying yesterday's tire tracks like secrets the town had agreed not to repeat. The mountains stood beyond the rooftops like watchmen carved from granite, their shoulders wrapped in cloud, their breath spilling down into the valley as a pale fog that tasted faintly of pine and iron. Into that hush came Officer Elias Mercer, 43, a man built the way long winters build fences, straight, practical, and quietly scarred. He was tall with broad shoulders and a back that looked like it had learned to carry weight without asking for permission. His hair was dark brown, cut short in a regulation neatness he hadn't fully let go of, and there was a tired line at the corner of his mouth that suggested he smiled rarely, but meant it when he did. His eyes were a cold river color, gray with a hint of blue, watchful, not dramatic, the kind that had seen too many late-night crashes and too many people pretending they were fine. A thin, pale scar threaded across his knuckle like a small signature from an old fight. Another faint mark rode his jawline, half hidden by stubble. He had the posture of someone who listened for trouble even when nothing moved. The town's little police station smelled of burnt coffee and damp wool. Sheriff Lyle Hartman, 58, barrel-chested, mustache like a snow broom, cheeks red from windburn, greeted Elias with a handshake that felt like a test of whether a man could be trusted to hold a rope on a cliff. Lyle's eyes were kind but sharp, his voice friendly in that Montana way that still left room for boundaries. He'd spent decades learning people the way trappers learned tracks, not by what was said, but by what was avoided. "We don't get many transfers this time of year," Lyle said, and there was a hint of humor there, as if the snow itself were an aggressive bouncer who scared most folks back to warmer places. Elias gave the smallest shrug, more honest than casual. He wasn't here to be impressive. He was here because the city he'd left behind had started talking to him at night. Not with voices, not with ghosts you could point at, but with the particular kind of silence that fills a bedroom when everything you've tried to forget remembers you anyway. Coldwater Ridge had offered a temporary post, a quiet department, and the polite lie of distance. If the memories followed, at least they would have to climb a mountain to do it. At Elias's left knee moved Ash, 8 years old, male German shepherd, black and tan coat dulled slightly by age, but still handsome, in a rugged, weatherproof way. His muzzle had begun to pale at the edges, as if winter had kissed him too many times. One front leg, his left, carried the faint stiffness of an old injury. It didn't slow him much, but it changed the rhythm of his stride after long hours, the way a veteran's limp tells a story without words. Ash's eyes were deep amber, the color of whiskey held up to sunlight, intelligent and steady. His ears, tall and alert, seemed to read the wind like pages. He had the disciplined calm of a working dog who'd earned the right to rest but didn't quite know how. He stayed close to Elias, not because he was anxious, but because loyalty had long ago become their shared language. In the lobby, a young dispatcher named Marin Pike, 26, slim, freckles across her nose like a constellation, hair pulled into a practical braid, offered Elias a clipboard with a smile that tried to be light. Marin's kindness had the quickness of someone who'd learned to laugh so she wouldn't break. Her brother had been lost to a winter highway pileup 2 years ago, and since then she treated every storm warning like a personal threat. She leaned down toward Ash, careful not to invade his space, and he allowed her a sniff of his gloved fingers as if granting a small permission. "He looks like he's seen things," Marin said softly. Elias answered, "So have we." And the words landed between them like a shared understanding neither needed to decorate. Lyle assigned Elias to patrol the ridge roads and check on isolated cabins during weather shifts. Simple work, but in a town like this, simple could become deadly fast. Before noon, the forecast turned sour. Snow thickened, wind rising, the kind that pushed against windows like a hand testing a lock. Elias and Ash left in a dark department SUV that looked almost swallowed by white as it moved through town. The heater blew warm air that smelled faintly of rubber mats and old pine freshener, but Elias's hands remained cold on the wheel, as if his body didn't trust comfort. They drove past the diner where an older waitress named Sarah Weller, 63, short and sturdy, silver hair pinned in a bun, laugh loud enough to cut through blizzards, waved from the window with a coffee pot in one hand. Sarah's warmth was famous in Coldwater Ridge. She fed lonely men and tired mothers and pretended not to see tears. Years ago, she'd lost her husband to a logging accident, and afterward, she had decided grief would not be allowed to starve anyone on her watch. Elias lifted 2 fingers from the steering wheel in a quiet salute. Sarah smiled like she recognized the look in his eyes, like she'd seen it in mirrors in hospital hallways, and like she knew the first thing a wounded heart needed was to be treated as if it still belonged among the living. Beyond town, the road narrowed into a corridor of pine and rock. Snow clung to branches, heavy and bright. Ash sat in the passenger seat, harnessed, head up, watching the forest with the focused serenity of a sentinel. Elias's radio crackled with Lyle's voice, then softened into static. "Storm cell's moving faster than predicted," Lyle said. "If you're headed toward the high trailheads, keep it short. No hero stuff, Mercer. We've buried enough brave men to last a century." Elias almost smiled. Almost. "Copy that," he said, because men like him always said copy that, even when the world didn't feel copyable at all. They parked at a lower pullout where the ridge trail began, an access path used by hikers in summer and by fools in winter. Elias wasn't hunting adventure. He was doing what police in small towns did when weather turned feral, making sure nobody had driven up, gotten stuck, and frozen quietly while the world kept spinning. He clipped a leash to Ash's harness, then reconsidered and left it slack. Ash didn't roam. He worked. The snow under Elias's boots made a soft crunch, the sound strangely intimate in the wide silence. Wind shoved at his coat, slipping icy fingers under the collar. The sky hung low and pewter, the kind that made noon feel like dusk. They climbed slowly. Elias's breathing fogged the air. Ash's breath came steady and controlled, as if he'd trained himself not to waste heat. The trees thinned, opening to a slope scattered with granite ribs and scrub. Somewhere beyond, the mountains rose, indifferent. Elias felt that old tightening at the base of his skull, the sensation he used to get before a door kicked in, before a radio call went wrong, before an ordinary moment split open. He told himself it was just the weather, just the exposure, just the nerves of a new posting. Then Ash slowed. Not a dramatic stop, just enough that Elias felt it through the leash without looking down. Ash's ears angled forward, then rotated slightly, as if tracking a sound that didn't want to be found. Elias halted. The wind dropped for a heartbeat, and the world became so quiet it felt staged, like the pause before an orchestra's first note. Ash took 3 steps ahead and sat, straight-backed, unmoving. The posture was not fear. It was recognition, the kind reserved for moments when lives were on the line. Elias's hand moved instinctively to the pocket where he carried a small folding knife, a habit left over from years of needing a last resort. He scanned the tree line, the rocks, the open slope. No birds rose, no rabbit darted. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "Stay," Elias whispered, and the word came out like a prayer disguised as a command. Ash did not move, his gaze fixed on a point ahead and slightly above them, where the mountain folded inward, where shadows gathered beneath a jagged rise. Then Elias heard it. Not loud, not clear, but wrong. A faint metallic vibration, like a wire pulled too tight and brushed by the air. It threaded through the snow and pine and touched something older inside Elias. something that didn't belong to Coldwater Ridge at all. He swallowed, throat suddenly dry. "Sheriff Hartman," he said into the radio, pressing the talk button until his thumb ached. The response was thin static, the storm chewing the signal. He tried again. "Dispatch, this is Mercer. I've got something. Unclear. Possible hazard. Requesting guidance." Marin's voice answered in broken pieces, half swallowed. "Merc. Signal? Bad. Repeat. Are you safe?" Elias looked down at Ash. The dog's muscles were tight, coiled, but his eyes were steady. It wasn't panic. It was duty. Elias understood, with a clarity that felt almost cruel, that the mountain had just placed a question at his feet, and walking away would be an answer too. Behind him, town lights were invisible, buried under falling snow. Ahead, the hum continued. Subtle, persistent, a whisper made of metal that did not belong to nature. Elias drew a slow breath that burned his lungs and tasted like cold. He adjusted the strap of his coat, checked the first aid pouch on his belt, and steadied himself the way he used to before stepping into unknown rooms. "All right," he murmured. Not to the radio, not to the storm, but to Ash, to himself, to whatever truth waited up there. "We go just far enough to know what we're dealing with. Then we bring help." Ash rose smoothly, placing himself back at Elias's left knee, shadows overlapping even in the gray light. Together they moved toward the rise, the snow thickening around them, the mountain silent, and the hum, patient as memory, guiding them into whatever came next. The rise did not look like much from below. Just a crooked fold of stone where the mountain's skin had buckled and frozen that way, a shallow shadow stitched into the slope. Snow slid down its face in thin white curtains. The wind returned in short, sharp gusts, pushing at Elias's coat, rattling the pine needles above them, then easing again as if the weather itself were thinking about what it wanted to do next. Ash walked at Elias's left knee, his gait steady but slightly uneven now that the climb had lengthened. The old injury in his front leg never complained. It simply reminded the world that time had touched him. Elias did not pull on the leash. He didn't need to. Ash's focus had narrowed to the point ahead, where the hum persisted, faint and unrelenting, like a memory refusing to lie down. Elias felt the same tightening at the base of his neck he had felt 100 times before bad calls, when the air itself seemed to lean forward. He slowed, placing his boots carefully, testing each step for ice beneath the powder. The mountain did not announce its traps. It invited you to discover them with your bones. They rounded the rise and the world changed. Metal flashed in the muted daylight, not a reflection but a presence. Jagged aluminum skin jutted from the slope at a crooked angle, half buried in snow and rock, its edges torn open as if the mountain had taken a bite and never finished chewing. The nose section was driven deep into the stone, crushed and twisted, while the mid-body lay splayed across the incline. The tail was nowhere to be seen, either sheared off and buried below or flung somewhere the wind had decided to keep. The faint hum Elias had heard threaded through the wreckage, carried on the breeze, a thin vibration that did not belong to winter or pine or granite. He stopped breathing. For a heartbeat, the years fell away and the smell of burned fuel, imagined, remembered, rose in his throat. He had not come here for this. The mountain did not care. Ash approached first, not rushing, not prowling. Measured steps, nose low, drawing the air in short, precise pulls. His ears flicked back once, then forward again. He made a sound deep in his chest that was not fear and not aggression, but something closer to concern. Elias forced himself to move. Each step toward the wreck felt heavier, as if the ground resisted him on purpose. He crouched near a torn panel and brushed away snow with his glove. The metal was cold in a way that did not come from the air. It seemed to hold its own weather. Elias keyed his radio again. "Dispatch, I have visual on aircraft wreckage. Repeat, aircraft wreckage on the ridge trail. No fire, no smoke. Possible military. Coordinates to follow." Static answered, then Marin's voice, thin and broken by distance and wind. Say again. Aircraft?" He repeated slower, and the storm swallowed half of it. He gave the coordinates as best he could. "Weather's closing in. I'm making a quick safety sweep for survivors. Will retreat if conditions worsen. He did not add that the hum was in his bones, or that his dog had recognized this place like an old scar. Inside the torn body, the remains told a story no report ever would. The seats were shredded, foam spilling like exposed bone. Safety belts hung loose, their ends cut cleanly rather than snapped. Near the rear bulkhead, what remained of it, rusted cans lay stacked with care, their labels long gone, their lids blackened by fire. Someone had rationed here. Someone had waited. Elias knelt, heart ticking loud in his ears. He saw a small circle of ash on the metal floor where a flame had once lived. He imagined the hands that had fed it, cupped against the cold, and the eyes that had stared at the same gray sky. Ash stiffened. His head snapped up, ears rigid, eyes locked on a darkened section beneath a loose floor panel near the aft. He pawed once, then again, more urgently, then froze in that straight-backed sit that meant everything and nothing at once. Elias's pulse quickened. Not with panic, but with a focused clarity he had learned to trust. He pried back the panel. Beneath it, half buried in gravel and ash, was a steel container, compact and sealed, its surface scarred but intact. It was not luggage. It was not debris. The moment Elias touched it, Ash backed away 2 steps and sat again. The same warning posture. And then the dog looked at Elias, not at the container, not at the wreck, but at him. Ash's amber eyes held something that twisted painfully in Elias's chest. Recognition, not of place, but of memory. Elias felt it too, the sense that this was not the first time Ash had stood beside broken metal and unfinished duty. He tightened his grip on the container. "What do you know, boy?" he murmured, though part of him already feared the answer. The wind swept through the torn fuselage and the hum rose, resonating like a whisper that refused to die. Elias stood slowly. The weight of the container in his hands had nothing to do with mass. He checked the sky. The clouds had thickened, lowering, the light thinning toward afternoon. He set the container down where Ash could see it and lifted his radio again. "Sheriff Hartman, this is Mercer. I have an aircraft crash site, unknown age, signs of prolonged survival. Requesting immediate coordination with state and federal. Weather may prevent access." Lyle's voice came back faint but steady, the mustache in it even through static. "Copy, Mercer. Storm's eating our lines. Pull back if it turns. Mark the site and get safe." Elias hesitated. The word safe felt theoretical up here. They circled the wreck, moving higher along the slope to understand its shape. From above, it was an anatomy lesson carved into stone. Aluminum ribs exposed like the bones of a carcass picked over by time. Sunlight struck the torn metal at a cruel angle, turning shredded panels into blinding mirrors. Elias shielded his eyes and saw another place for a moment. Heat and dust, engines screaming before giving up. He stopped, breath shallow. The past had a way of ambushing him when he least expected it, and this place was an ambush waiting to happen. He pressed his palm against the rock and forced the memory back where it belonged. Ash moved ahead again, nose tracing the ground, then lifting to test the air. He paused at the tail section, what remained of it, where the fuselage opened like a mouth frozen mid-scream. Inside, the air smelled wrong. Not rot, not fuel. Something older. Human. Ash hesitated at the threshold. One paw lifted, body rigid. That hesitation mattered. "It's all right," Elias murmured, though he wasn't sure who he was reassuring. He ducked inside, careful where he placed his weight. The floor creaked under his boots, a thin complaining sound that echoed too loudly. The evidence was everywhere once he allowed himself to see it. More empty cans stacked neatly, another fire scar, belts cut clean. Someone had freed themselves, or someone else had. Ash stepped in behind him at last, moving with care that bordered on reverence. Ash froze again, eyes fixed on a darkened corner near the torn edge. Elias crouched and peered into the shadows. At first, nothing but rock and debris. Then he saw it. A smear on the metal wall, darker than the rest, where someone had braced themselves. Fingers had pressed there once, leaving behind the faintest trace of oil and sweat. Human hands. Ash let out a soft whine and nudged the spot with his nose. He wasn't tracking anymore. He was remembering. The realization hit Elias harder than the wreck. Ash had been trained to find threats, but this reaction was not training. It was personal. "You've been here," Elias said quietly. Not a question. Ash did not look at him. He pressed his nose to the floor, then the wall, then the air, tracing invisible lines only he could read. When he finally sat, it was the same straight-backed posture as before, eyes lifted toward the open tear and the sky beyond. The wind shifted, slipping through the broken body of the aircraft, and the faint metallic hum grew louder, resonating through the hollow shell like breath drawn through broken ribs. Elias closed his eyes. He heard a voice in memory, orders clipped and urgent over engine noise, and felt the old weight of responsibility settle onto his shoulders. Ash lowered his head and let out a single sharp bark, brief, controlled. It echoed and vanished. Elias's eyes snapped open. Ash did not bark like that unless something had changed. Elias spun toward the opening, scanning the slope below. Nothing moved. No figures. No animals. But the bark had broken the silence, and in its wake came a new sound Elias hadn't noticed before. A faint clatter, distant but distinct, like loose metal tapping stone far below. Someone else was on this mountain. Elias's pulse quickened. He motioned Ash back with a subtle gesture that never needed words. Ash obeyed instantly, moving to Elias's side, body angled outward, ready. Whatever had happened here wasn't finished, and the mountain was no longer theirs alone. They withdrew deeper into the wreck, using the shadows for cover. Elias's mind raced, old habits snapping into place, elevation, sight lines, escape routes. The tail section creaked again, swaying slightly, and Elias felt the drop yawning beneath them. One wrong move and gravity would finish what time had started. Ash's ears tracked the distant noise, rotating minutely as he pinpointed its source. His breathing slowed, calm, focused. The same way he had been when Elias had first met him years ago, younger then, sharper around the edges, standing beside another man whose presence Elias could still feel like a phantom limb. The wind gusted again and the hum rose, vibrating through the fuselage until Elias felt it in his teeth. He met Ash's gaze. The dog's expression was unreadable but intent. A silent communication passing between them. This place mattered, not because of what had crashed here, but because of what had refused to die with it. Elias took one last look at the interior, the cans stacked with care, the cut belts, the smear of a hand on the wall, and committed it all to memory. Then he eased back toward the opening, careful to leave everything as he had found it. Outside, the light had thinned further. Snow began again, small and persistent, filling footprints as soon as they were made. Elias glanced once more at the broken aircraft against the mountain. It no longer looked like debris. It looked like a warning that had been ignored for too long. He rested a hand briefly on Ash's neck, fingers pressing into warm fur. "We're not alone anymore," he murmured. Ash's ears flicked, eyes fixed downslope, where the faint noise had come from. Elias understood with a clarity that left no room for doubt. This was not a forgotten crash site. It was a place someone had tried very hard to erase, and whatever secret had been hidden here was still alive enough to draw others into its gravity. The mountain remained indifferent, but the wreck watched them all the same. The snow did not fall all at once. It drifted in thin, patient layers, the kind that crept into footprints and softened the edges of everything it touched, as if the mountain were trying to erase proof that anyone had ever been there. Elias watched the white curtain settle across the slope and felt a strange certainty settle with it. This place did not want witnesses. It tolerated them only briefly. Ash stood at his left knee, muscles coiled, ears cutting the wind into invisible pieces. The faint metallic hum still threaded the air, quieter now, but persistent, like a thought the mountain could not forget. Elias eased backward into the torn fuselage, keeping the container low in his pack and the shadows high on his shoulders. The distant clatter they had heard moments earlier had not returned. But its absence pressed harder than sound ever could. Inside the wreck, time seemed trapped. The smell of old metal and human presence lingered, thin and dry, as if the years had never quite finished passing through. Elias knelt beside Ash and opened the steel container. The lid gave a muted groan that sounded too loud in the confined space. He froze, listening. Nothing. Only the wind breathing through broken ribs of aluminum. Inside, the contents were arranged with care. Not panic, not accident. Magnetic tapes sat in foam-lined slots. Beneath them lay folded maps, thick paper softened by age, marked with hand-drawn lines, shaded zones, circles around places Elias recognized from regional charts, but had never seen described that way. At the bottom rested a small brass tag, its edges worn thin by fingers that had worried it again and again. Elias lifted it. The metal was cold, but the name cut through him like heat. Caleb Rowe. The letters were clean and deep, not stamped in haste, not scratched by fear. Elias knew that name, not personally, but by reputation. Caleb Rowe had been an investigator with a federal land and environmental task force years earlier, a man who had resigned under pressure after refusing to sign off on a series of controversial relocations tied to defense development. The official reports said he had disappeared. The unofficial ones said he had stayed behind to protect something no one wanted protected. Elias looked at the tag, then at Ash. The dog's body had gone utterly still. His breathing slowed. His gaze fixed on the tag with an intensity that reached beyond training, beyond instinct. Elias felt the weight of understanding settle into his chest. "You knew him," Elias said quietly. Ash did not look at him. He did not need to. The truth was already in the space between them. Years ago, before transfers and paperwork and grief rearranged the world, Ash had belonged to Caleb Rowe. Elias could see it now in the way Ash held himself, in the reverent stillness that had nothing to do with commands. Memory had brought the dog here long before Elias ever arrived. Elias closed his eyes. The wind sighed through the fuselage, producing that faint hum again, stronger now, resonating through the hollow shell like a voice drawn through broken ribs. For a moment, the mountain was no longer Montana. It was sand and heat and distance. It was another sky, another mission, another voice telling him to move, to leave, to trust someone else to hold the line. He opened his eyes and felt the present return with its cold, clean edges. He lifted one of the magnetic tapes and turned it in his hands. The casing was scuffed but intact. The fragile weight of it made his throat tighten. These were not just recordings. They were voices that had refused to vanish. Ash shifted closer, his shoulder brushing Elias's knee. Not by accident. By choice. Elias replaced the tape and unfolded the first map. It showed the ridge they were on, the surrounding valleys, several marked routes, and a location circled in heavy ink near an old fire lookout labeled in block letters, Skybridge. The word stirred something faint in Elias's memory. He had passed a weather station by that name years ago on a winter transfer. A lonely structure perched high on a ridge where the wind seemed to write its own laws. He had not stopped then. He wished he had. A new sound crept in beneath the wind. A faint scrape. Stone against stone, deliberate, human. Ash's ears snapped forward, his body angled toward the opening. Elias stilled, heart ticking loud in his chest. The mountain's silence had changed shape. Someone was moving down slope, careful but unashamed, as if they knew this place existed and expected to find something worth claiming. Elias slid the brass tag into his jacket pocket, close to his heart, and secured the container inside his pack, redistributing the weight with practiced efficiency. He did not take everything yet. He did not have time. Some truths needed to be carried later. Others needed to be guarded now. They withdrew deeper into the wreck, using the curve of the fuselage for cover. Elias pressed his back to cold metal and mapped the space the way his mind had always done, when seconds mattered. The entrance, the drop, the fractured seam along the side, the wind's rhythm. Ash mirrored him, body low, muscles coiled, breathing so controlled it was nearly invisible. The hum threaded through the wreck again, steady, patient, as if the machine itself were listening. The footsteps paused outside. Elias tightened his grip on the strap of his pack. The man outside did not rush. He did not stumble. Whoever it was moved with the ease of someone accustomed to entering places already claimed, already arranged for him by money and silence. Elias felt something old and dangerous rise in him. Not the chaos of fear, the calm resolve that came when the line was clear. The shadow at the opening shifted. A figure appeared briefly, half seen through blowing snow, then retreated. A test. Elias did not follow. He waited. Ash did not growl. He did not bark. He held. Minutes passed. The wind grew louder. Then the sound of the mountain itself intervened. A low groan rolled through the ridge as a sheet of loose stone gave way farther upslope. Rocks tumbled, clattering down the face of the mountain, breaking the silence with sudden violence. The unknown figure moved off quickly, retreating into the storm. The danger did not vanish. It postponed itself. Elias exhaled slowly. The wreck's interior seemed to breathe with him. He knelt and rested his forehead briefly against Ash's warm fur. "We stay," he whispered. Ash's tail thumped once against the metal. Stubborn. Alive. They waited until the wind settled again. When Elias finally rose, the storm had begun to thicken, the sky lowering into a heavy pewter ceiling. Time was closing its fist. He gathered the container and the most fragile of the tapes, leaving the rest hidden beneath the loose panel where Ash had first found it. The mountain would keep them for now. Before leaving, Elias placed his palm flat against the cold wall of the fuselage, near the smear of a human hand. "I see you," he murmured, not sure if he was speaking to Caleb Rowe, to the unknown survivor, or to the truth itself. The wind answered with a softer hum, almost approving. Outside, the snow had grown heavier. Visibility dropped to a gray tunnel that swallowed distance. Elias and Ash began the careful descent, each step deliberate, each breath measured. Behind them, the wreck remained, half buried and silent, its voice waiting for the right moment to rise again. Elias knew the mountain had given him a name it had been keeping for years. And now he would carry it. The storm did not arrive all at once. It crept. Elias and Ash had descended barely a third of the ridge when the first growl of engines cut through the wind. Low, patient, mechanical, the sound of something that did not belong on a mountain in winter. Elias stopped. Snow sifted from the branches above them, whispering against his coat. Ash's ears lifted. His body shifted forward, not with alarm, but with readiness. The way a soldier squares his shoulders before opening a door that might change everything. The road below was nothing more than a scar in the white forest, a maintenance track carved for summer tourists and forgotten the rest of the year. Now it held 3 black off-road vehicles climbing slowly, chains biting into ice, headlights dull behind curtains of snow. Someone else had found the mountain. Elias guided Ash into the cover of a cluster of wind-twisted pines overlooking the road. From there, he could see the convoy stop near the trail marker they had passed earlier. Doors opened. Figures stepped out. Their movements were coordinated, confident, practiced in places where authority did not expect questions. At their center stood a man who did not belong to the cold. Victor Hale. Mid-50s, lean, tailored even in winter. His dark coat was cut for boardrooms, not blizzards. Silver threaded his hair at the temples. His face held the careful polish of someone who had learned how to smile while deciding the fate of other people. He moved with quiet command, not because he was the strongest, but because he was the one everyone watched. 2 of his men flanked him, younger, broad-shouldered, faces shaped by military discipline that had long since traded uniforms for contracts. The third hung back slightly, a bearded man, late 30s, eyes tired in a way Elias recognized immediately. A former soldier, not the kind who forgot what he had been. Victor consulted a tablet, then lifted his gaze toward the ridge. His eyes paused exactly where Elias and Ash hid. Elias's spine tightened. Victor spoke, his voice carried faintly by the wind. "This is the location. We proceed carefully." Ash's muscles coiled. Elias's radio crackled. "Mercer, What's your status? Marin's voice, thin, worried. Stand by, Elias whispered into the mic. I have company. He watched Victor Hale begin the climb. They did not rush. They did not stumble. They moved like men accustomed to erasing things. By the time the group reached the wreck, Elias and Ash had already moved uphill, circling wide through the trees to gain position above them. The mountain offered its quiet cooperation, muffling their passage, concealing them in white. From the higher slope, Elias could see everything. Victor approached the broken fuselage and stopped. Snow brushed his shoulders. He studied the wreck with something that was not surprise, not grief, but calculation. Secure the perimeter, Victor said. This site falls under restricted recovery. Nothing leaves this ridge. The bearded man hesitated. Sir, this is police jurisdiction. Victor's mouth curved. Not anymore. The men moved to obey. Elias rose from behind the trees. That's far enough. The words carried. Victor turned. For a moment, neither man spoke. Snow fell between them. Ash stepped forward one pace, his breath low. Steady, visible in the air. Victor's eyes flicked to the dog, then back to Elias. His smile appeared. Polite, incomplete. You must be Officer Mercer, he said. Victor Hale. Federal Contracting Liaison. You've wandered into a restricted recovery zone. Elias's jaw tightened. This is a crash site. There are signs of survivors. This is an active investigation. Victor nodded, as if acknowledging a child's concern. Hazardous materials are involved. We've been tasked with securing the area. Hearing that word a lot today, Elias said. Hazardous. Victor's smile thinned. Records, data, things that could be misinterpreted without proper context. Elias stepped closer. Snow crunched under his boots. Then explained the context. Victor's eyes hardened slightly. That is not a discussion. Elias reached into his jacket and withdrew one of the magnetic tapes. He pressed play. Static cracked. Then a woman's voice filled the broken air. They told us it was for protection. They said the river would heal, that the animals would come back, but they made us sign. They said if we didn't, our children wouldn't have a place to sleep. The words hung between metal and stone. One of Victor's men shifted. The bearded former soldier looked down at his boots. Victor lifted his hand. That recording is incomplete. Taken out of... Funny, Elias said quietly. How truth always needs context once it starts speaking. The wind surged, rattling the torn fuselage. Victor took a small step back. This foundation, Victor said, has legal authority to reclaim everything on this site, including whatever you removed. And the people in those tapes? Elias asked. Victor hesitated just long enough. Unfortunate outcomes, he said. Not intentional. Collateral, if you will. Something old and dangerous settled into Elias's bones. They have names, he said. They have voices. Ash turned his head sharply toward the slope below. His ears locked forward. He did not bark. He did not growl. Elias followed his gaze. A black SUV had appeared lower on the road, engine still warm, men inside watching. Victor noticed. His smile returned, this time without warmth. You see, Victor said, this doesn't need to become unpleasant. Elias closed the distance until Ash's shoulder nearly brushed Victor's shin. It already is. Victor's eyes hardened. We can make your life very difficult, officer. Lawsuits, press, scrutiny. You've been off the grid a long time. That can be corrected. Elias thought of Coldwater Ridge, of Sarah's coffee, of Ash's steady breathing beside him, of the voices in the tape. Do what you have to do, Elias said. I'll do the same. For a moment, the mountain listened. The bearded man finally looked up. His eyes met Elias's. Something passed between them. Recognition, maybe, or memory of who they had both once been. He shifted his stance, subtly, creating space rather than closing it. Victor noticed. Enough, he snapped. We're done here. Two men moved toward the wreck. Ash stepped forward. A low growl rolled from his chest, vibrating through the snow. They stopped. You're not touching it, Elias said. Victor's smile returned, brittle. This isn't over. No, Elias agreed. It's not. Victor turned away, already issuing instructions into his phone. The men followed, casting glances back at Elias and Ash. The former soldier lingered a second longer, then gave Elias a single nod before retreating. Engines started. Gravel crunched. The convoy descended the mountain. Silence returned, heavier than before. Elias exhaled slowly. Ash relaxed only slightly, eyes still fixed on the road below. They'll be back, Elias murmured. Ash's tail flicked once. The mountain did not deny it. The storm arrived the way some memories do, without warning, without mercy, and with a voice that refused to be ignored. One moment the ridge lay under a gray hush. The next, the wind slammed into the mountainside like a door kicked open by the sky itself. Snow tore sideways. Pine branches bowed and flung their white burden back into the air. The broken fuselage began to answer the gusts with a raw metallic cry that scraped the nerves and made the ground feel suddenly less certain. Elias braced, boots digging into the slope. Ash dropped his center of gravity, stance widening. The old injury in his front leg compensated by instinct and heart. The world narrowed to movement, sound, and the urgent arithmetic of staying alive. Below, engines growled again. Not one this time. Two. Victor Hale had returned, and he had not come to negotiate. Elias slid backward into the torn belly of the wreck, Ash at his heel. Inside, the light fell away fast. Sun filtered through jagged holes above, thin blades cutting the darkness and illuminating dust that drifted like ash in a slow, endless fall. The air was colder here, insulated by metal and stone, and it carried the stale, enclosed scent of something sealed too long. The steel container in Elias's pack seemed to hum in sympathy with the fuselage, a vibration that felt less like sound and more like a pulse. He dropped to one knee, already planning. Hide what could not be moved. Anchor what could not be hidden. Make the mountain itself a witness. Outside, Victor's voice cut through the wind, sharp with impatience. Secure the site. We're taking it now. Elias's jaw tightened. He slid the container free just enough to work, muscles burning as he angled it toward a narrow fissure in the rock behind the fuselage, an old fracture filled with shadow and ice. He wedged the container deep into the seam, rotating it until stone bit metal and held. Then he packed loose rock around it, hammering pieces in with the heel of his boot until the space looked as if the mountain had always been that way. Ash hovered close, eyes tracking the entrance, ears snapping to every shift of sound. The wind hurled snow through the opening. A rock struck the fuselage with a sound like a thrown fist. Another followed. Then the mountain answered. A section of the slope above the tail gave way. Stones broke free, clattering down with sudden, lethal speed. Elias shouted Ash's name, one raw syllable torn from his chest. Ash moved before the echo died, surging not toward the opening but across Elias's path, placing himself between falling stone and the man he guarded. A rock clipped his shoulder and spun away. Another brushed his flank. Ash made a short, startled sound, more surprise than pain, and braced again, teeth bared, body trembling but unbroken. No, Elias said, the word ripping loose. He lunged, catching Ash as the dog staggered, pulling him back against the curve of the fuselage. Snow and grit pelted them. The storm howled, drowning out everything but the hammering of Elias's heart. Outside, boots scraped closer. A flashlight beam slashed through the opening, jittering in the wind. Elias's hand went to his jacket pocket, fingers closing around the recorder with the testimony. He did not play it. Not yet. He pressed his forehead to Ash's, breathing hard, steadying them both. And then the choice stood clean and brutal in front of him. The vault was hidden, but not unreachable. If he ran, if he took what he had and vanished into the storm, he could draw them away. He could keep the truth safe. He could come back later, maybe, if later existed. Ash lay against him, breathing shallow but steady, eyes bright with resolve that asked nothing and offered everything. Elias closed his eyes. The old calculus rose, familiar and merciless. Mission first, asset protected, casualties regrettable. He opened his eyes and felt something else take its place. No, he said again, quieter now. Not like this. He shrugged the pack off, setting it aside, and tore open the first aid pouch with numb fingers. The wind tried to steal the bandages. Elias worked fast and careful, wrapping Ash's shoulders snug and secure, hands steady in a way that surprised him. Ash settled, trusting, the way he always had. That was when the radio crackled. At first it was only static, thin and brittle. Then a voice cut through, steady as a hand on the shoulder. "This is Skybridge Station. Automatic release initiated." Elias froze. He knew that voice. Evelyn Moore, late 60s, tall and spare, silver hair pulled into a practical knot, skin weathered by altitude and years of keeping records no one asked for anymore. A librarian by trade, a guardian by choice. Elias had met her once on a winter transfer long ago at the old weather station perched high on a ridge the wind seemed to own. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had outlasted storms before. Her eyes missed nothing. Her voice did not apologize. "Data uplink live," Evelyn continued. "Broadcasting now." The storm carried sound in strange ways. From somewhere down slope, a rescue radio squawked. From another direction, a hiker's handheld chirped. The mountain itself seemed to take up the signal, bouncing it off rock and metal. Voices spilled into the air. Testimony, names, laughter braided with tears. The lullaby cadence returned, stronger now, threaded with others. A chorus the wind could not silence. Victor shouted. Orders snapped and overlapped. Men scrambled, slipping on scree, cursing the weather and the noise and the way control had slid through their fingers. A figure broke from the line below, the bearded former soldier. He climbed hard against the wind, face set, eyes locked on the wreck. When he reached the opening, he did not raise his weapon. He raised his hands. "Storm's bad," he shouted. "You need help." Elias stared, measuring. Ash lifted his head and fixed the man with a look that stripped pretense bare. The man swallowed and nodded once, as if answering a question only he could hear. Behind him, lightning split the sky without rain, a white scar tearing open the clouds. Thunder came a heartbeat later, close enough to rattle teeth and shake the fuselage. Another section of rock gave way, cascading past the opening. Elias hauled Ash tighter, shielding him with his body, shoulders taking the sting of flying grit. "Stay," he whispered into Ash's ear. "I've got you." The former soldier braced himself at the entrance, body angled to block debris, wordlessly buying them seconds. Elias used them. He checked the wrap, tested Ash's breathing, kept his hand steady against the bandage. Ash's tail thumped once against the metal, stubborn, alive. Below, sirens wailed faintly. Search and rescue, responding to the lightning strikes, to the radios lighting up across the valley with voices that refused to be buried. Cameras would follow. Questions would come. The vault would no longer be a secret you could crush with paperwork. Victor's shout cut through again, sharp with fury. "Shut it down!" But there was nothing left to shut down. The mountain hadn't chosen its side. The truth had. Elias leaned back against the fuselage, cradling Ash. The storm raged on, but inside that small circle of loyalty and choice, the world held. He bowed his head, breath shaking, and spoke the words he had not known he was saving. "Stay," he said. "This time, I'm staying." Ash's eyes met his. For a moment, the storm fell away, replaced by something fierce and gentle and unbreakable. Morning came quietly, as if the mountain had learned restraint. The storm that had howled all night was gone, leaving behind a sky so blue it felt newly made. Sunlight spilled across the ridge and settled on the wreckage without judgment. The broken aircraft lay where it always had, but something about it had changed. The metal no longer screamed when the wind touched it. The faint hum that had haunted the slope was gone. What remained was only aluminum, stone, and the long, patient breath of winter. Elias sat with his back against a granite outcrop a few yards from the fuselage, boots planted wide, shoulders heavy with exhaustion that went deeper than muscle. Ash lay beside him, head resting against Elias's shin, breath slow and uneven but steady. The bandage at Ash's shoulder was darkened with dried blood, but the bleeding had stopped. Every few moments, Ash's tail thumped once against the snow, a quiet signal to the world that he was still here and not done with it yet. Down the ridge, search and rescue crews moved carefully between drifts, their orange jackets bright against the white. Radios crackled with calm voices now, logistical, methodical. No one rushed the wreck anymore. There was nothing left to seize in a hurry. The Echo Vault, the steel container Elias had wedged into the mountain, was no longer just a secret buried in stone. It had become a story loose in the world, carried by signals and screens and human mouths that refused to close again. Elias watched as a pair of hikers stood near a ranger, listening to a playback on a handheld device. A woman pressed a mittened hand to her mouth. A man shook his head slowly, stunned. Farther down, a small group gathered around a phone held aloft. The sound was thin in the open air, but unmistakable. One of the voices from the tapes, clear enough now to break through distance and doubt. The mountain had amplified them once. The world was doing the rest. Victor Hale stood at the edge of the activity, no longer directing, no longer insulated. His tailored coat was dusted with snow and grit, his hair out of place, his polished calm cracked around the edges. He spoke urgently into a phone, his voice sharp with control stretched too thin. Cameras lingered at a respectful distance, lenses patient, predatory in their own way. The foundation he represented had shifted from authority to defense, from eraser to explanation. Elias did not watch him long. Some battles ended not with defeat, but with exposure. Footsteps approached from behind, lighter than boots, uneven in rhythm. Elias turned as a woman stepped into view, adjusting a shoulder strap heavy with equipment. She was in her late 30s, lean from movement rather than training, with wind-tangled dark blonde hair pulled back in a loose knot that refused to stay neat. Her skin carried the pale flush of altitude and sun. Her eyes, clear green-gray and sharp with purpose, took everything in at once. The wreck, the cruise, the dog at Elias's feet, and finally Elias himself. Sloane Mercer. She held up her press badge briefly, then let it fall. I'm here to cover the fallout. Elias didn't stand. He didn't need to. You always did show up where things break. Sloane exhaled, a sound halfway between a laugh and a sigh. She crouched a few feet away, resting on the balls of her feet, eyes never leaving his face. Up close, Elias could see the lines at the corners of her eyes, the cost of long nights and longer truths. She had their father's mouth, set stubborn even when softening. I didn't come for a story, she said. Not really. Ash lifted his head and studied her. After a moment, he shifted closer to Elias, placing his chin back against Elias's leg, but angling his body toward her too. An acceptance that felt earned rather than given. Sloane noticed. Her expression softened. Still making the right calls? She murmured, more to the dog than to Elias. They sat in silence for a moment, the mountain breathing around them. Finally, Sloane spoke again, carefully, like stepping stones across water. I don't need you to be a hero. I just need you not to disappear. The weight in Elias's chest shifted. Not gone, but redistributed. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the small waterproof notebook he had carried for years, its edges frayed, pages thick with crossings out and half-finished sentences. He flipped to the page he knew by heart. One line stood out, written years ago in a hand tighter than it needed to be. If I had gone back, Elias drew a line through it. Slow, deliberate. Then beneath it, he wrote 2 words. I stayed. Sloane watched without interrupting. When he closed the notebook, she nodded once, eyes bright. That'll do. Ash shifted again, pushing himself upright with a soft grunt of effort. He took 2 careful steps toward the wreckage, then stopped. Elias followed, standing beside him, one hand hovering near Ash's shoulder in case the dog faltered. Ash did not look at the plane. He looked at the ground where the echo vault lay hidden, then at Elias. His ears relaxed. His eyes were steady. It was not vigilance now. It was release. Elias placed his palm against the cool aluminum of the fuselage. The metal was cold, but inert. No longer humming, no longer vibrating with unresolved sound. The wind slid over it and moved on, unimpeded, unchallenged. Sloane stepped back and lifted her camera, framing the wreck not as a crime scene, but as a landmark, something that had marked time and then let it pass. Some things fall and vanish, she said, half to herself. Some fall so we're forced to stop pretending. Elias nodded. He didn't trust his voice yet. Later, as the crews began their careful work and the cameras packed up, Elias remained where he was a while longer. He thought of Caleb Rowe, of Evelyn Moore at Skybridge, alone with her weather instruments and stubborn courage, of voices that had traveled farther than anyone intended. He thought of all the times he had mistaken survival for silence. Ash settled again, resting his head against Elias's boot, eyes half closed, content in a way that felt earned. There were planes that fell into mountains and were forgotten. And there were planes that fell so that people were forced to stay, to remember, and to love again. By late afternoon, Sheriff Hartman arrived with state investigators and federal agents who did not speak loudly or make promises they couldn't keep. Elias briefed them, clean and factual. The evidence spoke for itself now. No one tried to hurry him away. No one told him he was in the wrong place. As the sun began its slow descent behind the peaks, Hartman clapped Elias on the shoulder. "We're going to need someone steady around here," he said. "Town council's already talking. Temporary chief at least, if you're willing." Elias looked at the mountains, at Ash, at Sloane, waiting nearby. "I'm willing," he said. Ash's tail thumped once. That night, Coldwater Ridge gathered in the community hall. The snow outside glowed under yellow streetlights. People brought casseroles and coffee and stories they had been holding too long. Someone played one of the recordings on the hall's old sound system. The room went still as the voice filled the space. Some cried. Some held hands. Some simply listened. Elias stood at the back with Ash beside him, feeling something inside him close, gently, like a wound that had finally learned the shape of its own healing. When the meeting ended, Elias stepped outside with Ash and Sloane. The sky was clear, the stars hard and bright. Snow crunched under their boots. The mountain watched them without speaking. Elias knelt and pressed his forehead briefly to Ash's. "We stayed," he whispered. Ash's breath was warm against his face. Solid. Real. The miracle was not that the storm had ended. The miracle was that they had not run. Sometimes God does not send a miracle with thunder or lightning. Sometimes he sends it through a loyal dog, a wounded heart, and a man who chooses to stay when leaving would be easier. This story reminds us that faith is not about being fearless. It is about being present. It is about standing in the storm and trusting that God is still working, even when the wind is loud and the road is unclear. In our daily lives, we all face moments where we want to walk away from pain, from responsibility, from truth. But miracles are often born in the moment we decide not to run, when we choose love over fear, when we protect what is right, even when it costs us, when we stay. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us what part stayed with you. Subscribe to the channel so we can continue telling stories of faith, courage, and quiet miracles together. May God bless you. May He strengthen you in the storms you cannot avoid, and may He give you peace in the places where you choose to stay. If you believe in the power of that message, type Amen in the comments.